Hey friends, welcome back. As a few of you have probably noticed, I decided to take a break over the holidays, but I am back and ready to talk about women in the church. This is our second to last video in the series. After we talk today about deacons, we'll be moving on to the office of elder. So today our question is, can women be deacons in the church? We're just looking at two views, one that says yes and one that says no. Before we really get into it though, we want to be sure that we're defining the office of deacon so we're all on the same page. Now this office is really flexible. Some churches use it, some churches don't. Some churches allow women to be deacons and some churches don't. It really varies from place to place. What we can all agree on though is that the word itself comes from diakonos in the New Testament, and its basic meaning is just to serve. That looks really different from place to place, as I mentioned. But we also agree that this office has a great deal of dignity. While the deacon does serve under the elders, it's a position that includes being under authority. It also includes dignity. Today we're going to focus our attention on two passages of the Bible. We're going to be looking at Romans 16, 1 through 2, and 1 Timothy 3, verses 8 through 13. We should remember that both of these books were written by Paul. We have the same author. We also have similar timeline. They're written just a few years apart. So we have the same voice, the same authority with these instructions. Let's talk first about why some people believe that women cannot be deacons. If you look at Romans 16, 1 through 2 in your Bible, you may notice that Phoebe is not called a deacon at all, but rather servant. In this case, people have presupposed that since Paul said in 1 Timothy 2:12 that women cannot teach or have authority over men, Phoebe therefore must not be a deacon. She's not allowed to have authority, she's not allowed to teach, which isn't really necessarily part of the office of deacon, but we'll go with it. So therefore, she can't be a deacon, she must be a servant. People that have this view also believe that office of deacon wasn't really established at this point in time, so it would be inappropriate to call her a deacon. Rather, she diaconated or served the church and Paul. Now, the next passage we look at for the no view is 1 Timothy 3, just verses 8 through 11. If you look at the requirements for being a deacon, you'll notice that one of the requirements is being the husband of one wife. Now, many people look at that and say, okay, even if a woman could marry a woman in this day and age and have a wife, she can't be a husband to that woman. In fact, women can't be husbands at all. Therefore, this passage must be saying that a deacon has to be a man, and it has to be a married man, and it has to be a one-woman man. Those are the reasons that people think that women cannot be deacons. But now, I want to draw your attention to some reasons that people think women can be deacons. As usual, these arguments include a lot more grammar and looking at the structure of the text. So that's what we're going to do today. For any words that I mention that may not be familiar to you, I'll put them right here so you can be sure to follow along. Let's first look at Romans 16, 1 through 2. Paul is commending Phoebe to the church in Rome as a deacon or servant from the church in Cenchrea. People who believe that women can be deacons say that Paul's grammar here is emphatic. He's saying that not only is Phoebe coming from Cenchrea, but she's coming on their behalf. The question is, what kind of genitive does Paul use here? There are two options for the kind of genitive that Paul is using here. If I were to describe what a genitive is in the English language, I would say it's usually used for possession. So if I say this is the scarf of Haley, then it's Haley's scarf. That's the genitive that we're talking about. So the genitive in question here is basically of Cenchrea. Is this a genitive of source, meaning that Phoebe simply came from Cenchrea, or is this a genitive of object, meaning that she's there for them on their behalf? Either way, Phoebe is there from or on behalf of the Church of Cenchrea, not simply as Paul's assistant or secretary. And this is important because in verse 2, Paul gives authority to Phoebe in the church in Rome. Now, the second passage we're going to look at is the same one we looked at before, 1 Timothy 3, verses 8 through 13. In this passage, we need to zoom out just a little bit and look at what Paul's talking about in context. Starting in verse 1, he gives requirements for being an elder. Verse 8, he switches over to requirements for being a deacon. And then in verse 11, he switches again. The question is, who is he talking to? We've had problems before with this gune word, which I'll link some videos for you to take a look at. Is Paul talking to women or is he talking to wives? Now, people that believe women cannot be deacons would tell you that Paul is talking to the deacons' wives. They have to behave in a certain way, uphold the decorum of the church, and this is Paul's plea to them. People that believe that women can be deacons say, that doesn't make sense. Why would Paul talk about elders, deacons, deacons' wives, and then deacons again? It doesn't make a lot of logical sense, and it kind of disrupts the flow. Secondly, why would Paul hold deacons' wives to the same standard as he holds deacons, essentially, and not have any requirements for being an elder's wife? This is true especially when we look at the word hosautos, which means likewise or in the same manner. Paul is holding these women just as high as the male deacons in the church. Now finally, there's no pronoun here in the Greek that would suggest that Paul is talking about their wives. We would need the word auton to appear in order to be talking about the deacons' wives. So we're either talking about wives in general or women in general. And again, the question is, why would Paul have such high standards for women or wives of the church, but not for husbands? And why are they the same as they are for male deacons? I want to also mention that this question of whether women can be deacons or not is not a new wave feminist question. You have scholars as early as Origen of Alexandria and Clement of Alexandria affirming the female diaconate. So what do you think? Where is the evidence the best? Do you think women can be deacons in the church or not? Next time, I'm going to make a video talking about whether or not women can be elders in the church. We'll be looking at this 1 Timothy passage as well as some others. As always, if you have any questions or any suggestions for video topics, please leave them down below. Don't forget to subscribe, and also don't forget to reach out if you need some scholarly resources if you're writing a paper or making a presentation. I'd be happy to help. I'll see you next time. Have a great week.